Hello, I'm Oriana Fox. Thank you for tuning in to Multiple O's, the spin-off podcast for my talk show, The O Show, which explores the crossover between working on the self and working to change the world. My guests include artists and other experts who expose their lives, bodies, and experiences to challenge expectations and conventions. In other words, they have skin in the game. So if you're interested in candid confessions, nonconformity, creativity, and mental health, you've come to the right place. Hello, welcome to Multiple O's. This is your host, Oriana Fox. I'm an artist with a PhD in self-disclosure. And I'm very excited because this week I'm here with Charlotte Warne Thomas, who's an artist, writer, and educator whose work explores the relationship between labor and care. She's interested particularly in invisible labor of women and parents, which is often overlooked and undervalued in the market-oriented world in which we live. Her work encompasses performance, installation, collage, and text. And she's recently been involved in researching and writing a report for a think tank called Autonomy.
It's now called Autonomy Institute.
Yeah, thank you. Which is called, the report's called Artists as Workers, and that's what drew me to her work. And I follow her on Instagram, where her feed inspires me to be more candid because she often presents her life and her opinions and experiences, her own challenges, managing the, juggling being a parent, an artist, a PhD student, and a teacher, but also very recently her bout with breast cancer and the impact that's had on her body and her energy levels. And so, I'm going to be asking questions about her research, about artists as workers, and also about that candidness on Instagram. So I guess my first question is, I was wondering about how you got involved as an artist, how you got involved with that think tank and writing that report. What made that research relevant to your practice?
Yeah, okay, so the kind of longer story, I guess, is that research, the artists as workers research, was pivotal for me because, so I was doing a PhD, I am still doing, which started in 2017, but I had proposed a PhD that was going to explore the value of gold in economic and speculative terms through art practice. However, that is not the PhD I'm doing now. I've shifted the focus. And I think that report was the thing that made me shift the focus. So basically, as a young artist, I went to the University of Leeds in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I was very engaged with feminist art practice. Griselda Pollock was one of the lecturers there, and I took her courses and was making kind of strongly feminist work, and I was really engaged with that. And it was very research based. I spent a lot of time in the medical libraries because Leeds has got a huge teaching hospital, and I was researching the way that women's bodies are pathologized, and this was my kind of focus. And then I had some kind of wilderness years where I didn't really know what I was doing after I left university. I have to say, in those days, students were not well prepared in their courses for life after uni. So I was kind of flailing around a bit. And then I really kind of honed in on wanting to do an MA. And I really was keen to go to Goldsmiths. I had friends at Goldsmiths and I thought it just seemed amazing. So I got into Goldsmiths and started in 2007. And then I was working on kind of feminist work around the body and like kind of pornography and women's magazines and kind of gossip magazines and how women are shamed. I think shame was a big, women's bodies are shamed and women's behaviour is shamed and kind of slut shaming. And I was kind of thinking about women's pleasure, and none of that work really went down that well, let's just say. And a lot of the criticisms were like critiques and feedback was that it was too personal. It was somehow too kind of political. It was too didactic was a word that was used a lot. And as far as I can make out, basically any work that has a kind of message was too didactic. So anyway, I guess I can't blame anyone else, but I found that the work, when I started making work that was, let's say, less didactic, I got, that got better feedback. So I kind of changed my practice slightly. And when I graduated from Goldsmiths, I was making work that was much more focused on economic relations, global economy, like trading. And I was using a lot of gold because I found that a really useful kind of material for articulating value and commodity status. And I was really interested in those kind of elements and how that interwove with labour. So labour and work was of importance to me at that time as well. But I kind of had left behind the sort of feminist strands that weren't in that work when I graduated from Goldsmiths. And I kept up with that kind of line of work. And then several years later applied for a PhD focused on this idea of gold as a kind of material that embodies so many different things, but how that operates in a financialized world as an unresolved element of art history. And I was claiming that I would resolve that in some sense through my practice, and I got funding for it. So I started doing it. Although I actually had my son at the same time, so I started doing it a year later than proposed.
But it's interesting that, you started off making feminist work coming from Leeds, and then they sort of knocked it out of you at Goldsmiths, and then you went forward ahead with that path, and then it ended up leading you straight back to kind of feminist concerns.
Yeah, I think so. So I think this is all like kind of on reflection, and at the time I would never have recognized this, but I do feel like there was a period when I was doing my MA, so like kind of the late 2000s, and I think kind of overtly feminist work was really unfashionable, and it was certainly really unfashionable. Work about motherhood was like dreadfully unfashionable. It was kind of totally passé. It was like you were just kind of consigning yourself. I mean, I wasn't making work about motherhood, but that's what I do now. But you were consigning yourself to be like a mother artist, which was like slating, I guess. That in that period, the art world felt like it was all about post-internet art and this sort of new machismo of like very intellectualized work. I feel like visceral and body-driven work was just like not visible at that period.
Yeah.
And so it was the sort of natural conclusion to not do that, I guess, at that time.
Yeah. It's funny because I just thought by 2007 it might be a little bit better because I was there. I finished in 2003, and like they definitely said that like my feminist looking work was derivative and bad, and
derivative was a word that was used.
Yeah, and
well.
It looked too much like 70s feminist art, and then
and we don't need that anymore. It's all done, right?
Yeah,
like
done.
Yeah. The feminists in the 70s have done it. So what are you carping on about?
Yeah, but I had one visiting lecturer tutorial with Jemima Stelly, and she was like, actually, I think that this is a meaningful connection to 70s feminist art. I think you should look into it a bit more. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I continued making, and I remember actually another artist asking me, are you sure you want to go into the world like as a feminist, like with that title, feminist artist?
Yeah.
Like, are you sure? And she gave me,
that was like but yeah, that was a derision.
Yeah. yeah. Like you're going to pigeonhole yourself as a feminist artist. But she also gave me Judy Chicago's autobiography, which is all about her having been through that pigeonholing and suffering and blah blah. And now, of course, we're on the other end of it, where Judy Chicago's like just had her retrospective at New Museum and then Serpentine, and she's like written a new book, and she's like everybody loves her. She's got thousands of followers, millions of followers on Instagram.
And I absolutely really related to Judy Chicago. Has that piece, the name of it I can't remember exactly, but where she kind of is doing those abstract drawings at the beginning of certainly at the beginning of the Serpentine show. There's the abstract drawings, and then she has this kind of revelation, and she sort of brings the vaginal drawings into the abstract drawings and writes about that in the print. And I was like, oh my god, yes, exactly this. She's like, oh, I was doing these abstract drawings and they kind of fitted in with the art world and what people wanted to see. And then I was like, actually, I want to put some like some kind of femininity in women's like maybe not women's issues, but like I guess women's bodies in here. And yeah, I was like, yes, this is me. So I really, really enjoyed that Judy Chicago exhibition, much more than I was expecting, actually. Yeah.
And I think I kind of got away with making feminist art because my feminist art sort of made a joke about it, like, or kind of made fun of it. It was very like, had a sort of jokey, you weren't sure if I was sincere or joking, and my kind of...
Yeah, and sincere was
so
used...
that was okay.
Sincere was used
I got away with that.
as an insult. Like, I remember people saying, oh, yeah, your work's very sincere. And that was like bad, obviously. Like the way that was said, it was like, yeah, okay, that's bad. I shouldn't be sincere. Okay. Which is odd. It's really weird. Like I mean, in retrospect, it's all a bizarre experience. But
yeah, I was thinking by 2007 things were starting to get better though because of the WAC exhibition, and like there was suddenly in the art world in 2007 there was some freeze issues about art and feminism, and there was some sort of renewed enthusiasm in the art world, but maybe that was just... I
mean, I don't remember...
But maybe that wasn't impacting Goldsmiths so much.
Yeah, maybe it hadn't filtered through to me.
Because I remember feeling like I was too early or something, but it's like, yeah, and then when it came back around, like, I had a child, or two children, so I couldn't be there and part of it or whatever, or something, or nobody knew I existed, or... I don't know. Yeah.
It's really hard. I think one of the things about like the art world that really hacks me off is this kind of... I mean, it doesn't hack me off anymore, but like this kind of cycle of what's fashionable and what's not. And and people will deny that. So like, if I was to have said that when I was at Goldsmiths, they would have denied it. It's not about fashionable. It's about quality. You know, it's about good art. Which it's not. That's absolute rubbish. It's about the market. It's about what sells, and it's about taste making. And taste is nothing to do with good quality. Taste is to do with like hierarchy and class relations, and that's what the art world is. So like this idea that that it's like, oh, if it's good quality, then it'll get out there. Yeah. Bollocks.
But if it's good quality and sincere and derivative,
yeah, right.
And
you've got no hope.
What were the other bad qualities? Didactic.
Yeah, didactic. Yeah,
like all those things.
Yeah, didactic. And now I'm like, okay, so, and I fret a lot about my work, and I think, oh God, is it too didactic? Is it too this? Is it too that? Now I think, if it's didactic, I think good. I don't care if it's didactic. Is it didactic? I don't know. I don't care. It's a bad idea to second guess these things anyway, but
yeah. But you're very committed to trying to help the art world be more inclusive, I feel like, and, you know, kind of leveling things so that it's not so based on the tastemakers or class, or, you know, that we might have more voices, and one way of doing that is by, you know, enabling artists to be, you know, artist labor to be remunerated as opposed to just unpaid.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I mean, I guess we all kind of know it, but sometimes you have to really spell these things out before it's like, oh yeah. And that was one of the things that happened when I wrote the Artists as Workers report. So I know what it's like in the art world. All my friends are doing it, and people are slaving away and like working really hard on their practice, and they're driven by, you know, their desire to create work usually, and they'll do it whether they're paid or not, and that's fine. But then you get this situation where people are doing it for a passion, for love, whatever, and that means that they become easily exploitable. So if you have a situation where people are working for free, so they're doing all their research and development for free, so they're training themselves as an artist, they're working away in their studios, they're making paintings or sculptures or whatever it is, usually kind of funded by themselves. Perhaps they're selling a few things, perhaps not. But then when it comes to like being commissioned and engaging in like funding bodies and organizations and stuff, what we find is that because people are working kind of off their own back anyway, that they don't value they're kind of working for free, so they don't value their time in the way that someone who's, you know, in a corporate world does. So then they undervalue their time, and so it's easy for big institutions to kind of tender to create projects unbelievably cheaply, because all these artists are willing to work for peanuts, because they work anyway for little or for nothing. So when someone's offering a few peanuts, it's like, oh, well, great. And actually what you get is this kind of race to the bottom where institutions begin to kind of realize that they can pay nothing, and some people will still do the work. And that means that you get a certain section of people who begin to be excluded, because only certain people can work for nothing. So you get a situation where after art school, lots of people kind of keep going with their work and they're keeping going with their practice. But then gradually life happens, people get older, they may start to have illnesses related to getting older, or just related to kind of, you know, as time goes on, we're more likely to get sickness, illness, and they may have families. So that's, you know, that very much sharpens your focus on how you're going to get an income, because babies don't pay for themselves. They may have relatives or friends that need looking after. So, you know, as you get older, life gets more complex. And so you see this situation where people drop off and that they can't afford to keep on doing their practice unsupported. So they do it for a bit and they drop off, or they take part-time work, but gradually the part-time work becomes full-time, and people just kind of drop off. So that the only people left doing it are people who can afford to do it. And that's often a financial situation. They've inherited money, maybe they're from a kind of background, the parents are supporting them, or they live with a partner who works full-time, and that I have to say is my situation. I'm from a reasonably privileged middle-class background, so I've always had that kind of knowledge that if things go wrong, I can fall back on my folks, and, you know, they'll let me move back in, basically. And that's always been a kind of a cushion, a luxury cushion that I've had in my life. And now, even now in my life, I work part-time, but I'm enabled to work part-time rather than full-time because my partner works full-time. So we can afford for me to be doing my practice. I mean, I'm also funded through my PhD. But, you know, it's that kind of complex juggle of finances that we never talk about in the art world and as artists. So I think that what I really felt when I was doing this research was, and I was asking people about their finances, it was during COVID. So it was, we were talking a lot about the COVID furlough scheme, how that wasn't open to self-employed people, but there was a different self-employed scheme, which was similar. It gave you like 80% of your previous year's earning or something like that. But that was really problematic because artists often report very, very low earnings because you're trying to keep your earning below the tax threshold, and you've got huge expenses. So you're always like, you know, if your earnings on paper are absolutely flimsy, so then you're being offered 80% of that. You know, so the self-employment support scheme for many artists was kind of hopeless. And then there were various other schemes, and loads of artists fell through the cracks because they were not in self-employment, or they were not in employment, or they hadn't been doing self-employment for long enough. So there were loads of kind of stipulations, and lots of artists ended up in a, you know, having a terrible time financially. And it was interesting to talk to people and talk about how they were coping financially, and realize that this is the kind of backdrop of the art world that we never hear about. And it's how you keep being an artist, how you keep going, and the roots to that have really diminished over the last few years, because 20-30 years ago you could live very cheaply in London. You could squat, or you could rent very cheaply, and so you could
go on the dole.
Yeah, you could go on the dole. You could be on, you know, on the long-term dole, and you could, so you could get by and have time to do your practice. And we see, lots of the YBA artists managed to kind of get their careers going with that kind of attitude. They were young, they were living in squats, they were living in communes, and this kind of thing.
And then Emin was a beneficiary of Thatcher's program for starting businesses.
Yeah, and many
others
of her contemporaries. Yeah, so there were the
Jeremy Deller.
That's right. Yeah, there were a number of schemes, or particularly a scheme for small businesses, the name of which escapes me right now. But yeah, so there were ways around it. Whereas now, we've got incredibly high rents, and I think unaffordable housing is one of the biggest issues why young people can't get into the arts, because many people, especially in London, you have to work full time just to pay the rent and the bills and the food, and that's it. You don't have anything left over, and you don't have any time left over. So it's becoming more and more of a luxury to be able to be an artist, and that, I think, was the key thing that came out in this report, that if we have this world where only the wealthy essentially are able to be artists, we're going to get really, really boring art. And I think that's a problem. Of course it's a problem. And we're going to get an art world that excludes people who aren't middle class, basically.
Yeah. But I just want to go back to what you were saying about, it's not talked about in the art world, but I feel like there is in left-wing circles a tendency to do privilege checking. So I feel like there's a bit of privilege checking that happens, and I know that in White Pubes, little campaign that they've done, and probably in their book, or they talk about how artists should be speaking more openly about what has enabled their practice. But and then there are other arts organizations and stuff that when they get people to do a talk, one of the arts organizations you talked about in the report was
ArtQuest.
Yeah. If they have an artist come and give a talk, they make it part of the contract that they have to speak about their kind of circumstances that enable their work. And
I don't know if they still do that, because they said that so many artists refuse to do it.
I know, which is so interesting, because I don't think I would refuse to do it. And I do talk about, I don't think I'm completely closed to talking about it. I feel like I probably have mentioned on the podcast about, I have a partner who works full time. I have parents, I have had parents who have been supportive of me becoming an artist.
Yeah.
And a father who has financially supported me at times. I felt terribly, I felt terrible about that. I'm not a success because I get this help.
So I think what I would say to that, and it's taken me a long time to kind of think this through, I suppose, I would say is that it's really easy to kind of point the finger at artists like us. I mean, we're not raking in loads of money or anything. We're managing to do what we do and keeping going with our work, just about. So I think it's really easy to point the finger at, or feel like you're feel guilty, or feel kind of irresponsible, or I don't know what that feeling is, but actually it's not about that. It's much more about the system is fucked. So it's not my fault or your fault, and we can't take responsibility for that. But what came out of the second report, so I worked with Industria on their report Structurally Fucked, and that was, they approached me because of the Artists as Workers original report that I wrote. So when we worked on that report, what really came out of that is it's not about individual artists. We can't shoulder that blame. It's the system. The system is completely screwed. And if you read through that report, you really get a sense of how artists' unpaid labour is subsidising the entire visual arts sector. And I think also that there's an important distinction between the art market and the art world, which are often conflated, but they're not the same, because the art market is, it's essentially a kind of luxury goods market for incredibly wealthy people. And then you've got an art world that operates differently to that and is much more engaged with academia and kind of publishing and sort of the pursuit of new knowledge, let's say.
Because the art world includes also academia, like fine arts courses and
But the point is, it's structurally fucked. If you've got a system where the people creating the goods, like the product, the content, i.e. the artists, they're right at the bottom of the food chain. They're often unpaid. They work very hard, and then when they are paid, they're often exploited and given a sort of a stupid lump sum, which was another thing that came out of the industrial report, that lump sums are a totally inadequate way of paying anybody, but they are an exploitative pay structure or pay system. So it's the system that's screwed. There should be support for young artists. There should be support for everyone. You and I are perhaps people who wouldn't need that support because we're able to keep going anyway. But that lots of people do need that support, and that there should be support, and they do it in other countries. In Norway, you can apply for an artist's grant for a period of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years, and that's very doable. And lots of people do that, and that grant will sustain you for sustain your life, pay your rent, like give you enough money to live, so that you can be an artist for that period of time. In Netherlands, there are options for artists to be kind of subsidised. I know it's not as generous as it used to be. Many other countries have support schemes where they will support people in the early years of their creative careers while they establish themselves, with the understanding that it's a difficult sector or like a difficult career in which to establish yourself, and it takes a long time to become established. It's not as quick as other careers. You don't, just because you've got an art degree, it doesn't mean you can magically become a successful artist. I mean, it's probably tangential, but also I think there is an issue, and again that sort of came out of both of the reports, or comes out through both the reports. There is an issue with how we define a successful artist. Like, what is a successful artist? Do you mean someone who's being represented by a blue chip gallery and sells their stuff for £500,000? Is that what we're talking about for success?
Yeah.
Or do we mean someone who's winning the Turner Prize? Because those two things are very different. They rarely cross over. There's some crossover, but there's also a lot of not crossover.
Or is it simply just, I always tell myself, it's just being able to keep going and continue making things.
Yeah, and I remember, I think it was ArtQuest again, talking to someone from ArtQuest, and they said that when they survey their artist users, that is one of the main parameters for success amongst most artists, is being able to keep going. So if that's your parameter for success, then how that gets measured and what that looks like, I think is really important, because it's not going to look like lots of money. It's not going to look like huge profits, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But I guess I just want to go back to this thing about like the difficulty I have, or that obviously many artists who are asked by ArtQuest to reveal these things, and that they don't want to. And I think it's not just artists that probably feel that way. It's probably in all those situations, educational scenarios or whatever, where someone's asked to like do privilege checking, because then that people probably feel like that negates all the hard work and the talent or whatever it is that they are, individually have put into this thing, and making it all about the structures that have been supporting them. And so you can see how they would find it difficult or undermining of their sense of their own self as like a hardworking, successful, talented person. You know what I mean? So
yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's the.
It's in any field, like
that. Yeah,
you might
absolutely.
Feel
that's
way.
The cost of privilege checking, is that it is like awkward and kind of embarrassing.
Because I guess it's all wrapped up. I guess it goes to this idea of meritocracy and this belief we all have that the art world is a meritocracy.
And that's absolutely not true. The art world is not a meritocracy. It just isn't.
Well, I wanted to talk about this. One of the quotes in the Structurally Fucked report. It says, "There's it was an artist quote saying how they feel like there's a lot of pressure from organizations that employ them that they will over deliver." And my feeling when reading that was that I never sense that as a pressure from commissioning body or anything like that. I always felt that I think of myself as someone who over delivers. And in fact, in my family, we sing this song about me. She works hard for no money. Do, do, do. She works hard for no money. That like I just like I always have this tendency to just overdo things, and I thought that was something inherent in me. But maybe I have been all this time responding to an external pressure that I wasn't aware was external.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so. In some ways, I think maybe we're conflating two separate things. So, like, obviously, well, I don't know you well enough to kind of, pop psychology, kind of pop psychoanalyze you or anything. But like, I would say that this sense of the innate desire to over deliver, I think that's probably something that comes with for lots of artists and creative people, in the sense that they're very committed to what they do, and they're very passionate about their work. And if I think about the people that I've interviewed in the past, for example, like people are very passionate about their work, and they will. And I can relate to this myself. I will agonize over something for days or weeks even, and it's the tiniest little detail. It's like which font to use, or it's something that, to the casual observer, they just would never notice it in a million years. But to me, it's the most important thing, and it just takes over. And, you get obsessed with the details. And I completely understand that sort of sense of obsession that you have. And I think this idea that you're over-delivering is I would frame it more like you're a perfectionist, because that's what you do when you're an artist or a musician or an actor or something, is you put your very best effort out there, and that's all you can do, is you do your very best, and it's your expectation, because you've been crafting it for so many years. It's not like you've just come at this like a couple of weeks ago. You've been doing it for years, and so you'd be letting yourself down if you didn't do that. So I think there's part of that. Then I think also, as like women, middle class women, well educated, there's also this sense that you're only as good as your grades in school, and there's a pressure to deliver and to kind of the cult of productivities, like if you're not always being seen to be achieving something, and then your value as a person is questionable, and you become questioned. I think that's a kind of very negative, like late capitalist kind of assumption that we absorb as we grow up. That is what
pleasing, it sounds like.
People pleasing, but also the pressure from social media. Everything looks perfect, like perfectionism. And I think that's specifically for can be a pressure for women. And I would say, so that's, I think, is slightly different from this statement from the Industrial Report, which is the expectation that artists over-deliver is unspoken and loud.
Yeah, unspoken and loud.
That, I think, is slightly different. Again, this is more of the structural side of things, where you've got like an art world where institutions know that they can rely on artists who are perfectionists to deliver high quality projects for very low budgets, and they often present small sums for that. So the expectation is that you will be over delivering, because if you were delivering to budget, the job wouldn't be done, the exhibition wouldn't be finished, the work wouldn't be finished. The walls, and not the walls wouldn't be painted, because that's obviously not the artist's job. But if the artist was like, I'll do, I'll work to the budget, then they would be like, sorry, none of the work's finished, so you can just have this one piece that is finished. Who would be, the artist? That would be the artist implicating themselves. So I think that's where it gets. No,
I definitely can. I can think of an exact scenario of this happening.
Yeah. So
like,
it is,
or just like being asked to do something for a very prestigious gallery, and then but also it's understood that I've got to apply for Arts Council funding to make this happen, because the thing I want to do is obviously way more than their budget allows for, and then obviously not getting that grant, and then who's going to pay for it? Like having to ask my brother and like relatives and friends for money to have this thing, so I can then have this on my CV that I did something at that gallery.
That's crazy. So like that, in that,
and in fact, this I will name and shame, because it so annoyed the hell out of me. With I was corresponding with someone there for like 6 months, and I was going to write an Arts Council application to do an event there, and then they said they were going to support it, and whatever, in-kind support or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when it came down to it, they suddenly were like, actually, no, we want you to pay us to use our space. And I was like, what? You know, like, so now I can't put down in-kind support from the on my application. I now have to say they want a fee from me. And guess who's going to, like, you know, it's just, I mean, that's just unbelievable. Like,
yeah.
I just,
yeah.
I
mean, the stories that, you know,
and I just wonder, like, you do wonder, is it a judgment on me that they're asking me for money? Or, because I know many artists who've done events with and I'm just like, did they really pay them?
So
like,
I think this is the again, this is where, like, it's so easy as an individual, because as an artist you're very isolated often, and you know you exist, you're on your own most of the time. If you're in your studio, you're probably on your own. You're self-employed, so your kind of business model is just you on your own, and that is really isolating, and it's very, very disempowering. So you get a situation like that where you're very easily exploited. You don't have the solidarity of, like, yeah, maybe if they're mates of yours, you can reach out to these other artists and say, hey, do pay you, but you can't do that to other professionals. It feels odd, you know. Whereas, so I think that one of the things that again came out of both reports is that really, for me, a really strong importance of like solidarity through unionizing.
Yeah.
And in that kind of situation, that's where I would immediately be like writing to the union and saying, hey, they've just done this. Can you write them a letter and say, like, as the union representing our client, we would like to, you know, find out why, like, what can be done to resolve this situation to our mutual benefit, kind of thing. And the Artists Union, who I'm a member, but I'm also been in touch with them through the various researches that I've done. You know, that's what they do. They kind of pop up and say, like, we represent this artist, so that you're not alone. You've got like a network of people behind you who are supporting you and giving you a voice of your profession, giving you sort of some professional backup. Because I think that is a really key thing to the exploitation, is that you're on your own. Yeah. You're sink or swim, and, you know, we're all desperate not to sink. So we're left in this position where it's tempting to, And
art schools and our perception of the art world is that it's cutthroat and we're in competition with our peers and our colleagues, and not, we want to be in solidarity. It's not, the idea of solidarity with our peers and colleagues is not fostered in art school as it should be. And that's why subscription, like membership of artists, you write about this in the report, that membership in artist unions is very poor comparatively with other sectors.
Although it's good news is that it's increased loads. So I think when I wrote the report, they were under 1,000. This is the Artists Union England, and now they're nearly at 2,000. So that's huge growth in the space of like 3 years. Mm-hmm. So join Artists Union if you're not a member.
So I think that's really important. But I think, and I just want to go back to this thing of ideology, because another thing you say in the report that I was really interested in was this idea, you know, the unpaid labor, the link between like parenting and motherhood or whatever, and or just domestic labor in general, like whether it's cleaning or caregiving, being unpaid. The idea is that people do that work for love, and that's why it shouldn't be paid well, because obviously we don't want people doing it for the money. We don't want people looking after kids for the money or looking after the elderly for the money. We want them to be doing it out of the goodness of their heart, so that they'll be loving and they'll be caring and genuinely providing this.
Yeah.
So because if it's well paid, then people will do it for the wrong reasons. And so we have the same, I guess we have the same ideology with art making. Like if someone's just making art for the money, that work's going to be, void and empty and gross and gimmicky or something.
I think that there's a really strong kind of emphasis on like authenticity. So if you're an artist and you're making work for money, that's not authenticity. Mm-hmm. That's a commercial endeavor, and that's different. Art. Mm-hmm. So art likes to think of itself as not a commercial endeavor. It's different from art. Is not a job. It's not like if you want to do a job, go and do a job. But art is different. It's like above that. It's like we don't do it for the money. However, that model is kind of a very romantic model. It's that's what you get if you think about like the romantic artists. Like, oh, I suffer for my art. I will I spent all my last money on paints and now I can't, and now I'm starving, the starving artist kind of narrative. So that narrative is very tempting because it's quite romantic, it's sort of passionate, you're so passionate about your work that you put everything into it. But that completely fails to recognise that we do not live in a culture that allows for that. Like no one can live on passion. We all have to have some money to buy food and to pay rent and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is a really important kind of mismatch, that like the common perception of art as something kind of driven from an inner love and passion is very similar to the common sense of romantic love. Like you get married because of love and passion and stuff. And there's no doubt that I'm not saying that love isn't real or passion isn't real. That these emotions aren't real. It's just that they then allow capitalism to exploit us. So once you've, decided that you love your art, you are then you're exploitable. And once you are a woman, usually the woman, not always, and you have declared your love and passion for your partner, through marriage, let's say, and then you are exploitable, because then your labour becomes the household labour. And then that, chores are increasingly shared between the two members of the household nowadays.
Increasingly,
evidence,
but
not totally, but increasingly, but certainly not totally. But it's an improvement on how it was kind of 50 years ago, let's say. But as soon as a child is born, then that labour distribution radically changes and is still very much on the women's shoulders. And you get this huge, there are kind of, I can't remember who publishes it, but there's an annual report about like how much a woman should be paid for the raising of a child. If you count all the, chefing and mentoring and being a chauffeur and all the tasks that one does in mothering small children, that almost always fall to the women. It's like $180,000 or something. It's huge.
Yeah.
So the kind of, that's I think to do with the mismatch in capitalist thinking, that this romantic idea of like passion and love being your authentic drivers leaves you open to exploitation. And that's very much something that I got from I guess I first kind of came across that sense through Sarah Jaffe's book, Work Won't Love You Back, which I quote extensively in that first report. Yeah.
But yeah, so just to like, for my final question or questions, maybe, I wanted to talk about your Instagram feed and the kind of candidness that you have, which I really admire and appreciate. And yeah, so I don't know if you want to say something about that, or like the decision making about where you draw the line on bringing up personal matters, or how you kind of think about it.
Yeah, so I think with my Instagram, it is done with purpose. So I spend a lot of time like composing my I don't post that often, but my posts are quite thoughtful. And I sort of use it as a, like, almost as a research tool. This is kind of after the autonomy paper that I wrote, the research report, and that was during COVID. And during that period, my mother died, which was a very traumatic and difficult. She died reasonably suddenly, and I cared for her during the last weeks of her life, and that was utterly horrific. And that was during COVID as well, so it was kind of complicated by not having been able to see her for a long time before she died. So, I mean, the whole thing was just dreadful. And my son was still very young in nursery, and so those kind of experiences and the having written the report, like, all kind of compounded to make me just really think, like, oh my God, the whole situation is just crazy. Like, everything is just so bound up in predominantly women's caring labour, and it's so unseen and it's so unappreciated. And, you know, I'd watched these amazing carers look after my mum, and they were on minimum wage, and, you know, they were working incredibly hard and completely undervalued. You know, obviously I valued them massively, but, like, you know, they're underpaid massively. And I had cared for my mother while she was dying, and I, you know, during COVID, when we were stuck at home the whole time, I realised, like, I was caring for my son 24/7, and it all just took its toll. And I thought, and it kind of came down on me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh my God, this is reproductive labour in the Marxist sense. Like, this is what it is. And I'm doing it. I'm stuck in the middle of it. And so I just think that it was a real moment for me of, like, transforming my thinking and realising that that is what I needed to be focusing on in my research work. So the invisible labour of domestic child, like, parenting, basically, and the invisible labour that artists undertake, you know, as we've discussed, but, like, that I'd very much uncovered or been looking at in the reports that I've done. So that kind of has now become my focus for my work and stuff. And around that time, I started an Instagram account, and I didn't really use it with much purpose, but gradually I realised that all these things were kind of really linked, and that somehow, like, it was helpful to post on Instagram and share my thoughts about, like, toxic productivity and, like, the idea that we should always be busy, and these were things that I was often thinking about at the time. And then I found ways of articulating that, often through, like, things I'd listened to or things I've read, and that part of that was, you know, sharing the grieving process that I was going through after my mum died, and then sharing my, like, kind of stresses about parenting and how I find that really difficult. And, you know, I love my son, and he's the light of my life, but I also find it extremely hard to know what's right for him. And this is parenting. I find it a minefield, and I find it hard to juggle that with my desire to be an artist and to finish my PhD, and to, you know, it's hard. And I found on Instagram a community of other parents who also find it hard. And the more I looked, the more I found, and the more I became engaged. And so I found it really useful to kind of have these communities of people who are going through something like you're going through that I don't know in my real life. Like, I do know artist parents in my real life, but a lot of them I've met through Instagram, actually. And that's been really nice. So I've met lots of new friends and colleagues through Instagram that have been really pivotal in my kind of repositioning, I suppose, of my practice.
Also, I mean, you've done some posts recently about kind of your post-mastectomy body.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting that it related back to work you'd made previously about the page 3 son women, or just
Yeah.
you'd done a lot of research into breasts and
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned women's bodies, research into women's bodies.
I
at
mean,
Leeds.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the whole experience of recently being diagnosed with breast cancer and then having a mastectomy, oh my God, it's been enormous. It's been such a lot to take in. But I was really shocked at like the narrative of women's bodies, which I guess in my kind of art world bubble and like my feminist thinking, I sort of thought it would be different. I had a breast surgery like 25 years ago for something very benign. And at that time, that was when I was at Leeds, and I was it got me very kind of interested in the way that women's bodies are pathologized, but also these ideas of norms, like, oh, you want to look normal. And the way that the medical textbooks spoke about women's bodies being normal or abnormal, and the language they used really, really kind of surprised me, even back then. So that was like the late 90s, early 2000s, like fixing someone to make them normal in terms of like breast operations. So, and the surgery books, they used that language, and it was bizarre to me at the time. So then to come across that, 25 years later, having this diagnosis and meeting the surgeon, and this sort of assumption that I would have a reconstruction, which turned out to be much more complex than, I think everyone has this idea that you get a free boob job on the NHS. I mean, it's very much not that. And if you're having a single mastectomy, as I was, then the options for symmetry are limited, let's say. And as soon as we started going down that road, I just thought, why the hell would you do this? This is crazy. Obviously other people make different choices. That's fine. But for me, I just thought it's more surgery. It's more risk. It's more, the more I read about it, the more research I did, the more I thought, like, who am I doing this for? Like, when you have a replacement breast, a prosthetic, it doesn't have any sensation in it. So it's literally just a visual thing. It doesn't have a nipple. If you've had cancer, you have to have your nipples removed, because that's part of the breast. So I did ask if I could save my nipple. He said no. So you have this sort of inert mound with no sensation in it, and I was just thinking, what? Why? Who am I doing this for? Why would I do that? What's the purpose? Is it to look normal in clothing, or I don't know. So I just was so kind of flummoxed by it all that I thought, I'm just not going to do it. So I decided just to stay flat. And I mean, I've shared a certain amount of that journey on my Instagram. There's a couple of posts. I very much haven't shared a lot of it. There's a lot that I haven't shared. I'm still going through a lot. But I guess the reason that I thought a lot about sharing it at the beginning, when I first got the diagnosis, and I didn't share it for several months. And then I thought, I'm going to be out of action for a while. I'm going to need time to heal and recover. And I guess I want people to know why. I don't want to be like someone who just disappears and then whatever. And I guess I also thought, like, to an extent, it's a vulnerability. Illness and long-term disability are vulnerabilities that we just don't think, unless we have them, we don't think about them very often. And I know people who, who are in the CRIP community, and it's fucking hard. And it's, their lives are difficult, and they're often overlooked, and they're often, the reasonable adjustments are often not made. And I think it was just kind of an act of saying, you know what, we are just all bodies, and things go wrong, and it's kind of really toxic and privileged to pretend that they don't go wrong. And when they go wrong, I felt like it was maybe a minor act of solidarity to kind of say, my body's not working right now, and I need some time to hopefully recover and get back to things. But I think it was a question of like being upfront about that and sort of poking this capitalist productivity myth and saying, actually, it doesn't work like that. You know, this is a myth. It's not, we're not all like in a factory, just like cogs in a machine. That's what capitalism would like. It would like us to be cogs in a machine, but we're not. We're like soft, squishy, flawed bodies that have issues and problems. Everyone's got health issues. They might not know it yet, but everyone's got health issues somewhere. And if they haven't got them yet, they will have them. You know, we're all going to get old, and that comes with an array of issues. And I just felt like I should, I don't know. I just felt like it was, and lots of people have said it's been helpful for them to understand that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure it is helpful, and I think that there should be more visibility around this issue. Speaking of visibility, I wanted to return to, to find out more about those early works you did around page 3 and what influenced that. Was it to do with your own relationship with your body back then?
Yeah, so it was, it's interesting. As a young person, I was quite sort of busty. I kind of had a slightly antagonistic relationship with that aspect of my figure, because on the one hand it was like I would get lots of attention from boys, which was kind of fun and exciting and stuff, but on the other hand it was difficult not to be seen as kind of slutty or available, and it was also, in the late 90s, like, androgynous fashion, like Kate Moss, like skinny models. Mm-hmm. I did not have that figure. I had a curvaceous figure, so I kind of looked like a page 3 girl figure. I was curvaceous and busty, and I desperately kind of didn't want to be that, although it is kind of fun sometimes. And so it's like, it was very much like a conflicted relationship. So I was interested in that, and I researched it. It became part of my practice for a few years while I was at Leeds, and I was interested in like what breasts do socially. And I mean, that is a big question. There's a lot to unpick there, and I certainly didn't get very far with it, and I think it's extremely complex. And then, as I got older and I became a mother, I was able to breastfeed my son, and I was really pleased about that. And I found that incredibly, I was very privileged that I was able to do that, and it was an incredibly special thing to do. And I was really delighted that I was able to feed him. And so there was there's a changing relationship with your body and with your breasts and stuff. But then, so then it was interesting when I was diagnosed with cancer, and this surgeon who was male, and apparently I think it's like 80% of breast surgeons are men, and it felt like what they're talking about is like, so these breast surgeons, they like go to sort of conferences and like look at pictures of perfect bosoms and like how to make, they're like, if you create the incision slightly higher, you will create a fuller, more rounded breast shape. So they basically are obsessed with creating kind of porno bazookas. And I've heard that lots of times, people are kind of pressurized to get them bigger. They go, oh, don't get a B cup, get a C cup or a D. And I just can find that totally odd. Like this obsession with kind of mounded, like, breasts. It's like, it's so visual, and it's so it's so porno and weird, and but it is so there. I mean, I'm not saying
they
it doesn't
can't
exist.
make a realistic looking breast, or
no,
they
so
don't try
I mean,
to.
As a woman who's in my 40s and I've breastfed my son, I have not got pert. Oh, I say breasts. I have not got a pert breast, but they weren't pert and kind of perky. They were the opposite of that. And there's a word for it. I think it's called atrophic. Anyway, so we're talking saggy breasts. So the surgeon's like, obviously we've got to if we give you a reconstruction on one side, then we'll have to do something about the other side. And I was like, well, why? Can't you make the reconstruction look like the other side? And he said, no. I was like, why not? And basically the answer is they only make pert kind of, tennis ball breasts. They don't do like natural saggy breasts. They don't do that. There's no option to have a natural looking saggy breast put on. So if you want to have reconstruction, your only option is to have porno bazookas, which is the assumption is that that's what every woman wants at whatever age they are. I just felt quite confused. I was like, I want to stay how I am, and that wasn't an option. All the other options were to basically get the breasts of a 25-year-old, which I am not, sadly. And I just thought, no, I don't want the breasts of a 25-year-old. And I also, I just thought I just want as little as possible. So the plain mastectomy was what I went for. But yeah, the whole experience I found like quite baffling, and it really made me kind of unpick these. I haven't had a chance to kind of really delve into it in more theoretical terms, but it did sort of focus my mind on how society is absolutely obsessed with women being the object of the gaze. And so as far as I can make out, all the surgery I was being offered was not really for me. It was for my gaze maybe, but it was for the gaze of others and to make other people feel comfortable. And what I also find, so there's an expectation that most people who have a single mastectomy will wear a prosthetic, and I've got a prosthetic, but I don't find it very comfortable. And I just thought I don't feel very comfortable in this. But there weren't very many options. So to start with, certainly for the first few months, I didn't have any bras that weren't like prosthetic bras. So I was kind of uncomfortable. And I didn't really want to wear the prosthetic because it was quite sore on the surgery. So I was just wearing these like crop tops. I don't know. Anyway, this is all kind of a bit personal, but eventually I found this lovely company that makes single-sided bras, and that's been a game changer. So now I'm comfortable. That's the most important thing for me, is just I want to be comfortable.
Yeah. And that was the post that was one of the posts I saw, was that you were not in that bra.
Yeah.
And you said that you were interested in other women who had chosen not to have reconstruction, and like you seemed very aware of like who's kind of put that kind of image out there.
Yeah, well, when I first got diagnosed and they said I'd have to have a mastectomy, I was like, oh my god, that's not what you want to hear. So I immediately like went on Instagram and started looking for the hashtag like single mastectomy, or like one boob, or I didn't really know what I was looking for, but I searched and searched and searched, and I found a handful of women who are like out there with one bosom. And there's really not very many. It's very, it's that I only found like a handful of people. I've connected with several of them now. But yeah, there are a lot of people out there who only have one bosom, because the statistics show that a unilateral mastectomy is a very common procedure, and most people don't undergo reconstruction actually. Bearing in mind that most people who get breast cancer are, like, even though it is common in young people, most people who get breast cancer are older. So a lot of these women will be in their 70s and 80s. So I guess they're less likely to be inclined to get reconstructive surgery, because it's
that's interesting that it's the majority don't get it, but yet the surgeons all assume you'll want one. So they start talking about it. That's my understanding.
They certainly assume that when you're, because
it's odd if it's not the common thing, but yet the doctors seem to assume it.
I think it might be the common thing for younger patients. I don't know, but so he goes, well, one of the things I remember he said is like, a young beautiful woman like yourself, you'll be wanting, and it, had his tape measure out. Like he told me I had cancer and that I'd need a mastectomy, so I was kind of falling off my chair and like gobsmacked. And before I'd finished sort of, taking that in, he had the tape measure out, and I was like, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm measuring up for the reconstruction. I said, hang on a minute, I want to know what the options are. So I went away and looked at the options, and I had time to they gave me a lot of information, and I had time to think about it. And he didn't question my decision at all.
I guess it's good to end on a positive note.
We've talked for ages.
We've talked for a really long time. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
That's been a pleasure. I thank you so much for listening.
And thank you too for listening to this episode of Multiple O's. Thank you again to my guest, Charlotte Warne Thomas. If you'd like to see more of her work or read The Artist as Workers and the Structurally Fucked Reports, check out the show notes. All the information that you need is there, as well as a link to Artists Union England. And I really hope that you will join us and show some solidarity with your fellow artists. And even if you don't join the union, I hope you will accept yourselves, your life, and other people unconditionally, because we're all just fallible human beings.